I've always been drawn to places that most people avoid, not in a thrill-seeker kind of way, more like a morbid curiosity. I find beauty in decay, in the echoes of what once was. That's why urban exploration, or urbex as some people call it, became my thing. I'm not talking climbing skyscrapers or anything that insane. My limit is usually abandoned buildings, places with a story etched into the appealing paint and shattered windows. There was this mall on the edge of the city, had been closed for years, maybe a decade or more at this point. I'd driven past it countless times, always feeling this weird pull, like it was whispering, asking to be remembered. Finally, last weekend, I decided to give in to it. I did my usual prep, charged my camera, made sure my phone was fully charged, wore sensible boots, the whole 9 yards. Safety first, even if the danger is mostly rusty nails and questionable flooring. I knew getting in wouldn't be too difficult. Places like this are never as secure as they look from the outside. Sure enough, a little walk around the back and I found a section of chain link fence that was more suggestion than barrier. Slipping through was easy, and suddenly I was on the mall's property. Even from the outside you could feel the stillness, the silence that was heavy, almost suffocating. The once vibrant parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds. The faded signs listing long-gone stores hung crookedly. It was like stepping into a photograph from a different era, a ghost of consumerism past. The main doors, predictably, were locked tight, but I wasn't expecting that to be the way in anyway. After another circuit of the building, I spotted it, a boarded-up service entrance at the back. The plywood was rotting, and someone had clearly been here before, because a couple of planks were loose enough to pry off. It took a bit of effort, but I finally managed to create a gap just big enough to squeeze through. The air inside hit me like a wall, musty, thick with dust, and something else, like old popcorn and forgotten perfume mixed with damp concrete. The darkness was intense, even after my eyes adjusted. Sunlight struggled to penetrate through the grimy skylights and boarded-up windows, casting long, skeletal shadows from the skeletal remains of store fixtures. It was silent, truly silent, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, the kind that feels like it's pressing in on you. I fumbled for my camera, a small action cam I usually use for hikes, and switched it on. The tiny red recording light was a small comfort in the overwhelming darkness. I started to walk deeper into the mall. The layout was still vaguely familiar from memories of childhood shopping trips, but everything was warped, distorted by time and neglect. Storefronts were gaping holes. Mannequins lay toppled in grotesque poses, their plastic limbs scattered like discarded toys. The tiled floor was cracked and uneven, littered with debris, shards of glass, bits of plaster, and layers upon layers of dust. I kept the camera running, narrating softly into it, trying to capture the atmosphere, the strange beauty of this decaying space. My voice echoed strangely in the emptiness as I talked to the camera, bouncing off the high ceilings and disappearing into the unknown depths of the mall. As I moved further in, a prickling sensation started at the back of my neck. That feeling you get when you know you're not alone, even when you can't see anyone. I told myself it was just my imagination, the silence playing tricks on my mind. Abandoned places do that to you. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each step. It wasn't just the feeling of being not alone, it was the feeling of being watched. I stopped talking to the camera, wanting to listen, to hear if there was anything else besides the ringing in my ears and the soft crunch of my boots on broken glass. Silence. But the feeling remained, a low hum of unease that vibrated through my bones. I started moving again, trying to shake it off. I told myself it was just the building settling, the wind outside, anything but what my gut was screaming at me. But then I heard a sound. A faint sound, barely audible above the silence. A soft shuffle, like someone dragging their feet. It was coming from behind me, or at least, it sounded like it was behind me in the general direction I had just walked from. My heart started to pound. I spun around, camera held up, peering into the gloom. Nothing. just shadows and the ghostly outlines of abandoned stores stretching into the darkness. "Hello?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. Silence again, except for the frantic beating of my own heart. "Just nerves," I muttered to myself, trying to stay calm. "Old building, noises carry, probably just the wind." But the shuffle, it had sounded inside. I turned back around and started walking again, faster this time, trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. And then I heard it again, closer this time, the shuffle, and this time, maybe, a soft scraping sound too, like something heavy being dragged. My breath hitched in my throat. I didn't turn around this time. I just kept walking, faster and faster, my boots now clattering on the uneven floor. The feeling of being watched was now overwhelming, almost physical. It felt like something was right behind me, just out of sight, keeping pace with me. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud in the suffocating silence. The shuffling sound behind me, it was still there, keeping pace. It wasn't my imagination. Something was following me. Panic started to set in. My legs felt heavy, clumsy. I wanted to run, but something held me back, a primal fear that paralyzed my muscles. I just kept walking as fast as I could, eyes darting around, trying to see anything in the gloom, but there was nothing but shadows and decay. The shuffling sound became a little louder, a little faster. It was definitely following me, and it was getting closer. I could practically feel its presence behind me, a cold, unseen weight pressing down on my shoulders. Suddenly, I wasn't exploring anymore. I was running. I broke into a full sprint, my boots echoing loudly in the vast, empty space. I didn't know where I was going. I just wanted to get out. I ran blindly, stumbling over debris, my camera bouncing against my chest. I could hear the shuffling sound speeding up too, keeping pace, matching my frantic flight. It was like whatever was following me was just toying with me, letting me run, letting the fear build before who knows what. I didn't want to find out. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. The boarded-up service entrance. I ran towards it, adrenaline surging through my veins, pushing me forward. I scrambled through the gap I had made earlier, not caring about splinters or scrapes. I burst out into the open air, gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest like a trapped bird. The sunlight felt blindingly bright, even through the overcast sky. I didn't stop running until I was back at my car, fumbling with the keys, unlocking the door, and collapsing into the driver's seat. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and just sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, trying to calm down, to convince myself it had all been in my head. Eventually, I started the car and drove home, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. When I got back, I was exhausted, drained, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the lingering cold that had settled deep inside me in that mall. Later that evening, after a long shower and a drink, I finally felt like I could look at the camera footage. I uploaded it to my computer, plugged in my headphones, and braced myself. The first part of the footage was exactly as I remembered. Me walking through the mall, describing things, the eerie silence, the decaying beauty. And then, about halfway through, as I was walking down a long, dark corridor lined with empty storefronts, I saw it. At first, it was just a flicker in the background, a fleeting shadow in the periphery of the frame. I paused the video, rewound it, played it again, frame by frame, and there it was, in the distance, behind me, in the gloom of one of the darkened storefronts, a figure. It was indistinct, blurry, shrouded in shadow, but it was definitely there. A tall, human-shaped silhouette, standing motionless, watching me. It was barely visible, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. My blood ran cold. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck, it hadn't been my imagination. I kept watching, my heart pounding again. As I moved further down the corridor, the figure in the background seemed to shift, Not move closer, not really, but change position, as if it was tracking my movements. And then, a little later, as I was talking to the camera, trying to ignore the growing unease, another figure. In a different storefront, further back, even more indistinct than the first, but still there, watching. I watched the rest of the footage, my stomach twisting into knots. In almost every shot after that point, if I looked closely enough into the background, into the shadows, I could see them. Figures. Sometimes one, sometimes two, sometimes more. Always indistinct, always shadowy, always watching. And then, during the part where I started running, I paused the video again, rewound it, played it slowly. There, in the distance, in the darkness behind me, one of the figures was moving. It was hard to see clearly, but it looked like it was stepping out of the shadows, into the corridor, towards me. I couldn't watch anymore. I shut off the video, ripped off my headphones, and sat there in the dark, staring at the screen, my mind racing. I replayed the experience in my head, the sounds, the feelings, the overwhelming sense of being followed. And then the figures on the footage. I don't know what they were. Ghosts? Hallucinations? Just shadows playing tricks in a decaying old building? I don't have an explanation. But I know what I felt in that mall, and I know what I saw on that footage, and it was enough to make me seriously reconsider my hobby. Maybe some stories are best left untold, some echoes best left undisturbed, in the silence of forgotten places. I'm not sure I'll be going back to that mall, or any abandoned place, anytime soon. The beauty of decay suddenly feels a lot less appealing than it used to.